The Trump administration has frozen foreign aid, disrupting programs around the world that dealt with everything from emergency food assistance to removing landmines. Here are 5 questions answered on how these moves affect global stability and America's influence around the world. What role does USAID play in global stability? The U.S. Agency for International Development manages more than $40 billion a year in foreign assistance. It has programs in more than 120 countries around the world. The money goes toward everything from helping refugees to sending tents to places like Ukraine. It's a massive amount of work that also touches on promoting educational systems and good governance in various parts of the world. A huge amount of U.S. foreign assistance goes toward promoting global health. And that covers everything from nets, so to prevent malaria, to vaccinations against measles and polio, to also trying to stop the rise of AIDS in African countries. People who lose this funding are going to become more susceptible to starvation, to disease, and possibly to extremist ideology. This is the type of thing where if you lose educational services and you have young people without a school to go to, then they're going to turn to activities that could fuel crime. People are already literally dying because the US has frozen its assistance. Now, it is important to remember that the State Department has issued waivers for what they're calling core life-saving material. This includes medicine and food and things like that. But they haven't really defined this very well. And so there's a lot of organizations that don't know what qualifies for these waivers. How does a weakened USAID affect the United States? Much of the money that the United States spends on foreign assistance actually is spent inside the United States. For instance, the government purchases a tremendous amount of grains and other types of foods from farmers, and it uses that food and ships it over to feed hungry and starving people overseas. Because of this foreign aid freeze, those food stocks are just sitting there, not being used. And many farmers are not getting the money that they were promised for this. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe even billions over time. Many healthcare companies, such as Pfizer and Abbott, receive money from USAID to provide medicines and other materials that can go help people around the world. So when their contracts are not fulfilled, this hurts them and it could hurt the US economy. How could job cuts affect the aid network? Many of the people who work directly for USAID carry out core functions. They're the connectors. They're the ones who can push the buttons to get the funding out the door. They're the ones who are the managers, who know how to write the contracts, who know how to check to see if the money is being spent properly. And now most of these people have been put on leave or have been fired. And so it's sort of like ripping out the heart of much of the aid network around the world. And the USAID cuts affect other sectors as well. USAID works a great deal with private contractors. And so many organizations that work with USAID have had to lay off their people as well. There's a reverberation, and ultimately, at the end of the day, tens of thousands of jobs could get lost because of what's happened. How does USAID's contributions compare to that of other countries? Without US assistance, other countries, international organizations, NGOs, they're going to have to find other sources of money, or they're going to have to find ways to network and coordinate without the US there. And this is really hard because in a lot of ways, it's like you have a body without a spine. Some of those countries might be in Europe. Places like Norway are big aid funders as well. Many also believe that China could fill these gaps. And that is a concern for many US foreign policy observers because they think that this would make China a more powerful force in the future. What happens when the US abandons its role as the leader in global aid? The fear is that as US assistance is withdrawn, areas that were stable could become increasingly unstable. Diseases that were held at bay could spread. And natural disasters that take place may find that there's far fewer resources to help the people who are affected. But overall, the challenge here is that if the US leaves a vacuum and then tries to go back to fill it, it's going to have to do even more work than it did before. It's very easy to destroy these networks. It takes a long time to rebuild them. And in that amount of time, Lives are at stake.